Welcome to another episode of the Pennock Knockdown podcast for strategies and tactics that digital marketing leaders can use in their everyday life. I'm joined today with Kristin Lewis, who is the founder and CEO of Take Flight Marketing. Kristin, super excited to have you on the show today.
Super excited to be here with you, Nikki.
Well, I'd love to get into your bio and your background. So tell me a little bit about what you did leading into founding the agency and what led you to want to start.
So I've been working in marketing for over 20 years now. I started in-house working with a lot of different startups on their marketing team and really got to touch a lot of different channels. So I felt like I was pretty equipped when I started consulting, and I'd been consulting for a few years, and I decided, what would just happen if I started saying yes to everything that was falling into my lap and started to scale up my team. And so I started testing and playing with that and finding the right folks to plug in and for which channels, and we were successful. So in 2019, I decided to make it official and I started Take Flight Marketing. And so we focus largely on running paid media for direct-to-consumer brands. We are very well versed in paid social, paid search, paid audio, and so on and so forth.
And remind the audience of your, the verticals or industries you help in most heavily.
So we work largely with health and wellness brands. So we've had the pleasure of working with a variety of different supplements and fitness businesses and medical devices and beauty products. So we are very pumped about the health and wellness industry in general.
That is amazing. What a fun space to work in. So we like to start off asking what types of products you're really into. So given you're in health and wellness, are there any products that you recently discovered or services that you would like to shout out here?
This is really my favorite question. Definitely a topic I'm pretty passionate about. So I've tried everything under the sun. And I will say from a beauty perspective, I did recently try, the it product, the Augustinus Botter Rich Cream. It's absolutely worth the hype. It is so moisturizing. Also, the bottle is just gorgeous, that beautiful blue. So there are definitely a few standouts that I like a little bit more, but this moisturizer is definitely worth the hype. And then from a wellness perspective, I'm kind of into doing some weird things right now. So in fact, I'm going later today with my mom, and we're going to lay on something called a Vemi bed, which is PEMF technology, red light, infrared, some sound, and some vibrational technology. And then you get a vitamin drip in an IV at the same time.
Wow.
And so it's a little disconcerting when you lay down. There's a whole lot going on. The bed is shaking. There's this weird noise happening. You've got an IV drip here. And then all of a sudden you fall asleep. And you wake up, and every 30 minutes is worth 4 hours of rest. So I'm going to do that this afternoon, and hopefully that will have me glowing and feeling rested.
Well, and beginning of the year, month of January, sounds like the perfect time to take advantage of that great reset and moment of, just relief and break from your everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got to get it started right.
Absolutely. I love it. I feel like I should be going and doing that after today's recording as well.
Absolutely.
Well, switching gears a little bit, let's talk about marketing. Our agency overlaps with yours a lot in terms of services offered. So I'm excited to talk today about some tactics and techniques that you found that have either worked really well or really flopped. So I'd love to kind of hear what you have to say in terms of successes and lack thereof, and how you're looking at those moments to learn and move the needle going forward for certain brands.
You bet. I think, the foundation of any strategy for me is going to be, how do we test it? How do we test a variety of different variables so we can figure out what works best and we can amplify it and have a really, really strong strategy? So in general, a big part of my upbringing as a marketer was centered around testing, specifically A/B testing ads, A/B testing websites, A/B testing offers, and that really makes a big difference in terms of how things perform. And we are performance marketers at our core. So that really helps us slice and dice the copy, the imagery, the video that works, and helps us understand who we're talking to and build stronger strategies in the future. So let's say we're approaching a new TikTok campaign, for example. So we're not just going to launch one campaign or one audience. We're going to launch several different audiences so we can see how each of them perform. And within each of those audiences, we'll probably run the same creative so that we can see really what resonates with them. And then we can optimize and amplify going forward. I think that is really critical no matter the strategy you're testing. Something we've been testing a lot of lately is AI versus manual features. So most platforms right now are incorporating a large amount of AI, really pushing us to do some testing there. Meta's got some good AI features. TikTok does as well, as does Google. But through testing and through refining our methodology, we continue to find that often manual optimizations are what work best. And manual optimizations do continue to be what looks best. So I'm sure you've run some Facebook campaigns using the standard optimizations, and things can often look a little bit funky. And brands don't love that. They want their best foot forward out in the world. They want their clients and their consumers to experience them the way that they intended it to. So we have found through a variety of testing that manual still rules the roost and AI still has a lot of room to grow. Have you seen that yourself as well?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I do want to dig a little deeper into that, and then I have a follow-up question as well. And what we find, and it might be different in your businesses, is the machine learning campaigns will work differently depending on total budget allocation to the platform. So let's say we're talking about Meta and we're talking about Advantage Plus Shopping, broad audience versus maybe like the legacy build campaign where we're putting in lookalikes and just more standard, 2023 kind of modeling. When budgets are small, sometimes we find Advantage Plus Shopping does work better, but when budgets become like greater than $30K a month, let's say, then we have room to play with a lot of different layers and nuances to the data. But we have corner cases too, where Advantage Plus Shopping, even with limited budgets, do not perform at the rate we would expect them to. So it's what we generally have to do client by client is figure out, who their customer is, what their message is, who's going to resonate best. So we don't have like a formulated playbook where we get a new client, we're like plug and play, this is what month one looks like.
I think you're exactly right. It's really customized to each client. So ASC might work really well for this client, but not well at all for this client. So it's more like we have an arsenal of tools that we can test for each client and really figure out which custom set is going to work best for them and really move the needle for them.
What do you say to the prospective businesses you're trying to work with who really don't think there's much to media buying anymore because of all the AI and all of the machine learning? Because that's something we face sometimes in the industry. Is they're like, what do you really do? Like, what are you charging us for every month? Because, you're going to run Performance Max, you're going to run ASC. So what do you do with your time?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, certainly we can turn it on and we can set it and we can forget it. But we can do a lot better than that. And that's what performance is really all about. So I think that it's really about working face to face with the client on a weekly basis. I think that really being clear about what's on your plate. So what are we actually focused on this week? What are our priorities? And what are we testing? And how are those tests trending? I think that gets the client really engaged in what's happening and helps them understand that even though some aspects of the program are automated, we're still in there every day, hands-on, looking for opportunities to improve. And that's not necessarily something the AI is doing. So at least at present, I do still think AI needs a human supervisor, at least for the most part, but it'll be really interesting to see where that goes in the next couple of years. I mean, PMAX is pretty automated, but I have yet to find a PMAX campaign that didn't need tweaks. I certainly have not seen a brand be able to go out there and just start doing PMAX and win without that strategy and that experience that really sits behind that.
Well, that leads to the second part in my mind when we're trying to, source new clients and win them over for business is related to creative. And oftentimes during the early conversations, they'll say, Nikki, how many pieces of creative will we need every month?
Right.
When you're asked questions like that, how do you answer and what do you see in your industries?
Yeah, I think that I don't have a specific calculation. I'm sure there are some people that do, but really it's more of a gut or intuitive check. So based on the amount of spend, I would say we want to do about 70% of our budget towards our control or our core, what we know works best. And then 30% of the time we want to be testing. So testing new creatives and messaging to see if we can get some winners that are worth amplifying. So if we look at paid social from that perspective, that's where we're really looking at creative. If you're spending around 25 a month, I would say you should probably be testing about 10 new creatives a month. I like to structure things in a kind of control bucket, test bucket, and then dynamic bucket. So our control campaign is going to be focused on the client's audience. Our test campaign is going to be focused on broad because we always want to see which creative is the most scalable. And so I will put about 70 to 80% of my budget in that control campaign, focusing on surfacing creatives that we know are winners, and then 30% towards that test campaign. So we can see if we've got some other options that we can amplify for the month. So I think it's really critical to do that continuously. And there's more to test outside of just creative, right? So creative we test every day, but bid caps, audiences, new features. There are lots of different things that we can try. And I think that all goes into that 30% as well.
Yeah, we do the math to kind of break down what dollar amount should then require a new asset, because sometimes it's just easier for brands to understand that way. And you're spot on. So generally what we find is between $2,000 and $2,500, $2,500 is when a new creative is needed with every month's budget. So your math of for $25K, 10 assets like falls perfectly in what we're seeing too.
I love that.
Yeah. Tell me about something that maybe you had really great expectations for and flopped, or maybe there aren't any.
What is something I had great expectations for that flopped? I think building out non-brand strategies for specific brands, depending on the category, can be really, really challenging. So we did a lot of playing with that last year with a few particular clients. So we really tried taking a look at where we were getting the most search volume and then sort of categorizing those keywords by different topics and then starting to develop specific landing pages that we could drive those phrases to. That was not super successful. We tried it for about 3 months and we just really weren't seeing the type of CPAs that we wanted to see. We did a handful of landing page testing within that, copy testing, keyword testing, and we kept testing and we landed on non-branded PMAX actually, which performed super well. So I would say, just because a strategy worked for one brand doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You can certainly try, but as you mentioned before, it's not plug and play. It really is custom for every brand. And you just have to keep the wheels turning, because we got to find a winner, but what works for everyone may just not work for you.
Well, and I love that you bring that up, because we too find PMAX in any different way you can slice and dice it is generally working better than traditional search campaigns right now. But similarly, we work doing SEO for clients or with our in-house SEO team. And those are instances where we can say like, hey, we've tried this every different way we can think of strategically, and it's still not pulling in the CPA or ROAS we're looking for. So here's our recommendation for next steps for SEO, or something that can be a little bit more from the owned and earned lane rather than paid media. So I think there's still good insights in situations where performance isn't as strong as we need it to be for the brand.
Absolutely. There's always something we can learn, whether we win or fail.
Yeah, 100%. So when you think about the brands you're talking to and the businesses you're talking to about the services you offer, how has that landscape or response to paid marketing and paid media in general changed over the years? Since you've been doing this since 2019, are there any new topics or data points that brands are looking for when they engage with a business like yours?
I think that ROI will always be our North Star, but I think it's more important than ever. I think that everybody's stretched really thin from a budget perspective. So now more than ever, every single vendor, every single investment needs to get a return. And it's tough. We don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know exactly what that return will be, but making sure you're driving an efficient return, I think, is critical. So I think that's really the most important thing.
And when you look at return with attribution and all of the changes in the landscape, how are you kind of guiding the conversations with businesses around what they should be looking at in terms of where they're sourcing their metrics from and what good looks like?
That's such a good question and really depends, right? So I think that attribution is incredibly critical, especially when you're on paid social, whether it's Meta or TikTok. As you know, less than 50% of that action is actually going to show up in Google Analytics, which a lot of clients are still using as their source of truth. Not a fan. I think Google Analytics is a terrible source of truth and really have not taken a liking to GA4 versus the universal analytics. And I think a lot of other marketers feel the same way. It just feels a bit murkier. And so I find myself looking more at bottom line metrics in Shopify than paying close attention to what's happening in Google Analytics. I think that, again, when you're working with the Googles or the Metas and the TikToks of the world, you should have an attribution partner. So bringing on a Triple Whale or a North Beam can really help you close that gap because every touch matters. And we know that media is driving performance, but we need to be able to measure it the same way we measure our other channels. So we have apples to apples. So that's my 2 cents there. I'd love to know how you're tackling that.
I appreciate the questions back in my direction. One of the things, and it's overly simplified, but I like to think about is marketing efficiency rate. So total e-commerce revenue divided by total spend in paid media. And it's unfair because it's like, why would you look at the whole pie and then just equate it to the cost of paid? But I think it's an important metric to just keep an eye on and track over time to make sure it's becoming more positive. The higher the number, the better, because then it allows you and the business owner to have more flexibility in the types of campaigns you can run. So let's say, they're very much direct response today, maybe more bottom of funnel remarketing efforts in paid because, of course, that has the highest return on ad spend and the lowest CAC. But if we can convince them to look at MER a little bit more heavily and maybe spend slightly higher in awareness while hitting the same MER or an even better MER, we're kind of proving the part that every touch point matters. And so rather than obsessing over the most efficient return for every dollar spent, let's obsess over growing the business. So that's something I like to do, but we kind of have to teeter around it because some brands get really upset when you're like, I'm going to look at your total business and then look at costs. And they're like, that's super unfair. And it is. I'm not going to, pretend that it isn't an unfair metric, but I think when we're looking at directionality and long-term results, it is helpful to have that in mind.
I think so too. I think MER is one of the more critical metrics, I would argue. And the tide rises all ships. It may not be fair one-to-one, but every touch point matters and does make an impact. And tracking is more difficult today than it was. So
yeah, and I think, it's going to continue getting more and more tricky with all of the privacy changes that are expected to come out this year. I haven't read up on the latest. I know they've been put off for a while, but I believe everything's still happening this year. So you talked a little bit about TikTok. We talked about Google and Meta. You did talk about performance audio. I'd love to kind of have you hit on that a little bit more and what you've been doing in that space.
Absolutely. So we're actually just getting started. This year, we started doing some performance audio for brands, and we're finding it works quite well, especially for new brands that really need a large amount of awareness and an educated audience. I think podcasts are really where it's at. I think podcasts are also, in some ways, the new infomercial. Obviously, infomercials are still on, but that audience is now on audio. So what we find is that when we're advertising on audio, we see a big increase for search, right? Because it's driving more awareness, it's driving people down to consideration. So we really ought to see branded search pop up. And then likewise, we also typically see an increase in conversion across our other channels. With that improved awareness, we typically see better conversion on Meta, better conversion on Pinterest and TikTok, specifically with paid social. So we think it's been a great tool to add to our arsenal. Not everybody's interested in awareness. So it definitely can take a couple of months to really get your program tested and up and running. I think the key is making sure you're on the right shows. And that takes some time and some testing to get there. But we have a really great partner in iHeart. And we're excited to keep working with them in 2025.
Thanks for sharing a little bit more of that. Similar with our client load too. It's hard to convince brands that are still considered emerging to want to invest there because they're so focused on efficiencies, ROAS, and MER. So we hope to do more of it kind of bucketed through programmatic for us in 2025 as well. So that gets us to like changes overall. So what types of changes in marketing mixes, maybe technology stacks, anything else in the marketing landscape overall that you're kind of expecting to see this year now that we're in January?
I do think attribution is going to be a bigger topic this year than it has been in years past. So I think that people are looking to really demystify the data that they're seeing right now. Because as I mentioned, I think GA4 just makes it so much harder to get the information that you're looking for. I also think that, call me crazy, I don't think TikTok is going anywhere. I'm hearing everyone is doubling down right now on their efforts. People had an absolutely out of the park, knocked it out over holiday, utilizing TikTok shopping. I think that people are going to continue their investment there because people are spending time there. In fact, this year, time on TikTok, time spent, beat streaming. So we really have the attention of a large group of people here. There is no other place where you have the viral potential that you have on TikTok. My personal prediction is I think it will stay, and I think it's going to explode this year.
And I personally appreciate the targeting capabilities there. I'm not pushing the buttons in all of the campaigns going live these days at our firm, but it just seems like the granularity you can get to on TikTok is just a slight nuance to what we can see on other social platforms. So I do appreciate that there's different ways to kind of tackle audiences.
I agree. And they have some fun creative features that we don't have on Meta. So I enjoy using the countdown timer. I enjoy pairing banners with our creative. I'm really enjoying seeing how people are utilizing TikTok Live and shop together. So excited to see what's to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I will be right there alongside you to understand how much we can, dedicate budgets to TikTok versus other social placements or others beyond social. Wrapping up here, I've got just a few more questions for you, Kristin. The next one I love because it's about, giving ourselves wisdom at earlier stages in our career. If you were to give your earlier self advice on what it's like to start all over, either in the industry of marketing or creating your own business, what advice would you give yourself?
Get an accountant and an attorney right away. I think that working in-house gave me a ton of great experience in terms of how to be a great marketer and how to kill it for my clients. That I have. But running my own business was a big learning curve that I wasn't really ready for. And so the client work happened easily, but the finance portion was tougher for me to learn. So if I had to do it again, I would make sure I had an attorney and a CPA on day one just to help guide me and make sure that I set everything up properly. I'm set up for success. I'm set up to take care of my taxes as frequently as I need to. Really helps to have a system from the beginning as opposed to, just kind of throwing caution to the wind and giving things a try and then lots of cleanup later. So I would do that differently.
I'd love to poke a little further there. Why? Because I found myself in the same boat. So from your perspective, what prevented you from getting an accountant and a lawyer early on?
To be honest, I was an idiot and I thought I could do it myself. There are all of these great tools, like I was using Wave when I first started with invoicing or QuickBooks, and they can do a lot for you, but you have to know how to use them. And they were just a bit more complicated than what I'd used in the past. So I also had to learn how to manage cash flow. And while I'd managed a P&L and a budget for decades, managing the cash flow of a business and what's coming in and what's coming out was definitely a big learn for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I would say on top of that, the other thing I was so obsessive about is just the costs of all of the, personnel, products, whatever that we needed to use. So some of my reason for not starting on those two disciplines earlier was I just didn't want to spend money in that bucket.
Yeah,
it's quite yet.
It's tough. And I think on the legal side, when I was getting started, everything I was doing was very custom. And so that was laborious and that took a lot of time. And my attorney helped me figure out you can templatize your offering templatize, your agreements, your pitch decks, yada, 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 and, really get everything in place where you can scale. And that wasn't something I was thinking of. How do I templatize things and scale? I'm really, really happy he gave me that advice, and I'm better off for it.
So are there any events coming up this year that you believe marketers should be at, or you believe brands should be at, that you are maybe also going to?
Yes, I am shooting to go to 2 events this year, big events. So looking at e-tail, which will be end of February in Palm Springs, big e-commerce conference, lots of marketers and lots of brands there. So I think it's going to be great place just to build community. Have not been to a lot of events since the pandemic started, so really excited to get back out there. And then also hoping to hop over to Expo West. We work with a lot of clients in health and wellness, and there will be a lot of health and wellness brands there. So we're looking to connect.
We are trying to get to Expo West this year too, and you put the e-tail bug in my ear before we started recording, so I'll take a look at that a little more seriously too. Kristin, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. If anyone listening wants to reach out and get in touch with you about your services and anything else, how can they get in touch with you?
So you can find us on our website at www.takeflightmarketing.co. You can also find me on Instagram and on TikTok. So on Instagram, I am Kristin Takes Flight, and on TikTok, I am Kristin Drinks Wine.
Oh, I love it. We can have a whole different show about drinking wine.
Whole different show, Nikki, and a wonderful show it will be.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate so much your time today, and look forward to hearing more about how the year's unpacking and touching base with you again here before 2025 is over.
Likewise, looking forward to that as well, and looking forward to meeting up in person, hopefully at Expo West or e-tail.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that wraps another episode of the Pennock Knockdown. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody.